Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. We shall begin by looking at an article from page number 12 of the Delhi edition. This article deals with the 13th Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution and its background and as well as the current issues. So to understand this article in detail, we need to talk about the 13th Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution, which is essentially rooted in Sri Lanka's civil war. See, the brutal civil war that Sri Lanka has witnessed is an outcome of its ethno-religious divide. So to understand this in detail, let us take a look at a couple of maps that illustrates the demography of Sri Lanka. The map on the left shows the ethnic profile of Sri Lanka, whereas the map on the right shows the religious profile of Sri Lanka. The majority blue areas that you find in both the maps represents the areas inhabited by the Sinhala Buddhist majority. So essentially, the Sinhalas are the majority ethnic group and they happen to be followers of Buddhism. Whereas the Tamil minority of Sri Lanka is largely concentrated in the northern province, that is the Jaffna Peninsula, and as well as in the eastern province and the central highlands. The Tamil minority are largely Hindus and the country also has a few Muslims and Christians. So the brutal civil war that Sri Lanka has witnessed over the last few decades is an outcome of this ethno-religious divide between the Sinhala Buddhist majority and the Tamil minority. The Tamil minority in Sri Lanka can be further divided into Indian Tamils and Sri Lankan Tamils. The Indian Tamils are found in the central highlands of Sri Lanka, whereas the Sri Lankan Tamils are found in the northern and eastern provinces. Sri Lankan Tamils are those who have migrated to Sri Lanka from the south of India over the centuries and they have settled through the natural course of time. Whereas Indian Tamils were transported by the British to work in their plantation crops located in the central highlands. During the colonial rule, the British adopted a policy of divide and rule that deliberately favored the Tamils, and this angered the Sinhala Buddhist majority, thus creating a permanent divide between the two communities. So later, when Sri Lanka became independent in 1948, the Sinhala Buddhist government that was set up started adopting a discriminatory policy against the Tamils, which was an extension of the rivalry seen between the two communities during the colonial rule. The Sinhala Buddhist majority government came out with controversial citizenship laws that discriminated against the Tamil population, and it declared Indian Tamils as non-citizens. This made a number of Tamils in Sri Lanka stateless, and the Sri Lankan government expected India to take up responsibility for this. And through such discriminatory policies, the Sri Lankan government perpetuated a refugee crisis in the region. While India initially took up the responsibility of Indian Tamils in the interest of maintaining good relations with the Sri Lankan government, later the continuation of discrimination and oppression against the Tamils would create a major divide between the Indian government and the Sri Lankan government. So between 1950s and 1980s, the Sinhala nationalist government not only targeted the Tamil minority with discriminatory laws, but the radical Sinhala Buddhist nationalists, with the support of the government, were allowed to perpetuate widespread violence against the Tamil minorities in the form of targeted anti-Tamil riots. So such state-led discrimination and widespread targeted violence against them led the Tamils in the northern and eastern provinces and as well as in the central islands to raise their opposition, and this not only turned into a political movement, but it also quickly turned into a militant movement. These internal developments of Sri Lanka, witnessed between the 1950s and 1970s, started placing a moral obligation on India to support the Tamil cause because of the connection between Sri Lankan Tamils and the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. So on humanitarian and moral grounds, India was being increasingly called upon to step into this internal conflict of Sri Lanka and support the Tamil cause. Then in the 1970s, there were several geopolitical developments as well in the region, which pushed India to directly intervene in this internal conflict of Sri Lanka. During this period, India's geopolitical concern was that Sri Lanka was building close relations with the United States and as well as with China and Pakistan. So this growing inclination of Sri Lanka towards the United States and Pakistan, which at that point shared a hostile relationship with India, created a geopolitical cause for the Indian government to directly intervene in Sri Lanka's internal conflict. It has been alleged that India not only gave support to the political cause, but it also played a direct role in supporting Tamil militancy in Sri Lanka by providing funds, training, and weapons to various Tamil militant outfits, including the LTTE, which was established in 1976 with the objective of establishing a Tamil Eelam, or an independent Tamil nation, by liberating the Tamil inhabited areas of Sri Lanka. Reportedly, such covert support was extended by India through its external intelligence agency, that is RAW, and as the Tamil militant movement gained strength in Sri Lanka, the scale of violence increased significantly in the 1980s. But following the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in 1984, which was a result of the Khalistan movement and Pakistan's covert war against India, India started scaling back its covert activities in the region, and as a result, the subsequent Rajiv Gandhi government started pushing for peace in Sri Lanka, and it tried to resolve the civil war by offering to negotiate between the Tamil militants and the Sri Lankan government. These negotiations led to the signing of the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord in 1987, which was supposed to resolve the Sri Lankan ethnic conflict. Under the terms of the peace accord negotiated by India, the LTTE and the other Tamil militant outfits had agreed to surrender, and in return, the Sri Lankan forces were supposed to call for a ceasefire. Then, in order to restore equal rights to the Tamil minority, India convinced the Sri Lankan government to pass the 13th Amendment to its constitution, which would provide for the establishment of provincial councils in all the provinces of Sri Lanka, with the objective of providing greater autonomy to these provinces through the devolution of powers. The 13th Amendment was also supposed to recognize both Sinhala and Tamil as the official languages of Sri Lanka. Then, in order to enforce these terms of the India-Sri Lanka Peace Accord of 1987, India agreed to deploy the Indian Peacekeeping Force, or the IPKF. But this Indian involvement in Sri Lanka's internal affairs and the deployment of IPKF would turn out to be disastrous because the Indian strategy backfired and both the parties went back on their commitments. But however, the Sri Lankan government did manage to implement the 13th Amendment to its constitution, even as the civil war would continue for 2 more decades. So the 13th Amendment that was passed by the Sri Lankan government in 1987 provided for the establishment of provincial councils with limited autonomy through the devolution of powers, and it designated both Sinhala and Tamil as the official languages of Sri Lanka. But this topic still remains contentious and relevant even to this day because of its half-hearted implementation by the Sri Lankan government. See, as per the commitments made by the Sri Lankan government under the India-Sri Lanka Peace Accord of 1987, Sri Lanka was not only supposed to establish these provincial councils, but it was also supposed to provide for a high degree of devolution of powers. Subjects such as education, health, agriculture, housing, and more importantly land, police and financial powers were supposed to be delegated to the provincial councils. While Sri Lanka has devolved the subjects of education, healthcare, agriculture and housing, it has not been willing to transfer the subjects of land, police and as well as certain financial powers. So this half-hearted implementation of the 13th Amendment by the Sri Lankan government fails the Indian objective of securing the minority rights of the Tamil population. Sri Lanka has not only failed to transfer the subjects of land, police and few financial powers, but the president enjoys overriding powers over most of these subjects, thereby defeating the very objective of devolution, which happens to be the central pillar of the 13th Amendment. But even this half-hearted implementation of the 13th Amendment has been very contentious in Sri Lanka, because the 13th Amendment has been opposed by most of the stakeholders, including the Sinhala nationalists, the LTTE and as well as a few Tamil political parties. The Sinhala nationalists were opposed to the 13th Amendment because according to them, its implementation weakens the hold of the central government, and according to Sinhala nationalists, it is better for a small country like Sri Lanka to be ruled by a strong centre instead of delegating powers to the provincial councils. Militant outfits such as the LTTE and the others were opposed to the 13th Amendment as it defeats their objective of establishing a Tamil Eelam, which was the primary demand of the Tamil separatist movement seen in Sri Lanka. It had been opposed by a few Tamil political parties as well, because according to them, the 13th Amendment would not be sufficient to secure the rights of the Tamil minority. So a number of stakeholders in the Sri Lankan ethnic conflict were opposed to the 13th Amendment, but it has been implemented in a partial manner at the insistence of India, and hence the 13th Amendment continues to be seen in Sri Lanka as a symbol of Indian interference and imposition in Sri Lanka's internal affairs. But after the civil war came to an end in Sri Lanka in 2009 with the defeat of the LTTE, India has been calling for a complete implementation of the 13th Amendment. During this period, the Mahinda Rajapaksa government, which was in power, had given India assurances in this regard. But as the Rajapaksa government and his family turned pro-China during this period, it failed to fulfill these assurances given to India. But when Mahinda Rajapaksa lost the elections in 2014-15, and when Maitripala Sirisena became the president, it gave hope to India that the 13th Amendment might be implemented in its entirety. The Sirisena government took a few steps as well in this regard by first bringing in the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which restricted the powers of the Sri Lankan president and strengthened the role of the Sri Lankan Parliament and independent commissions. But however, the Sirisena government also failed in ensuring the complete implementation of the 13th Amendment, which is a priority for India. And now with the return of the Rajapaksa family to power, the issue of 13th Amendment is back in news. Last year in November, during the presidential elections, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the brother of Mahinda Rajapaksa, became the president of Sri Lanka. And in the latest elections held just a few weeks ago, Mahinda Rajapaksa has become the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. So the question of the 13th Amendment is likely to come up again, and India is going to push the Rajapaksa government to provide for the complete implementation of the 13th Amendment in order to secure the basic rights of the Tamil minorities. But even before that, resistance has been growing within Sinhala nationalists, and they have been calling upon the Rajapaksa government to repeal the 13th Amendment, and any such majoritarian move threatens to reopen the ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka. Now let's take up another column from page number 12, which sheds more light on how COVID-19 is causing rapid deterioration of lung capacity in a few patients. See, it has already been established that most of the COVID-19 deaths that are occurring, they are directly related to reduced oxygen uptake as a result of our reduced lung capacity, which in turn is caused by excessive fluid accumulation in damaged lung tissue. So essentially, COVID-19 causes severe damage to lung tissue in a few patients, and this leads to excessive fluid accumulation, thus reducing the lung capacity and thereby reducing the oxygen uptake. But however, studies conducted until now had attributed this damage to lung tissue to the cytokine storm that is triggered in a few patients as a result of their autoimmune response. A cytokine storm gets triggered when our own immune system goes into a hyperactive mode and starts targeting even healthy tissue in response to the detection of a foreign body that is affecting the immune system. This autoimmune response triggers a storm of cytokines which start targeting even healthy tissue such as lungs, leading to lung damage, which in turn results in fluid accumulation, thereby reducing lung capacity. But according to scientists and doctors who are treating COVID-19 patients, especially those with such severe symptoms, the cytokine storm alone doesn't completely explain the causes behind such rapid accumulation of fluids in our lungs. So in order to establish the other possible causes, scientists and doctors in the United States have carried out a study by using supercomputer-based data analytics, and this study has pointed to the possibility of a bradykinin storm for being responsible for this rapid accumulation of fluids in our lungs. See, bradykinin is essentially a compound or a molecule in our body that is associated with pain sensation and the lowering of blood pressure in our blood vessels. Studies have already established that SARS coronavirus 2 that causes COVID-19 enters the human body and affects healthy tissue by latching onto an enzyme known as the ACE2 receptor. The ACE2 enzyme is basically associated with the lowering of blood pressure, and studies have also shown that SARS coronavirus 2 affects another type of related enzyme and works against it that is known as the ACE enzyme. The role of the ACE enzyme is opposite to that of the ACE2 receptors. If the ACE2 receptors play a role in lowering blood pressure, the ACE enzyme plays a role in increasing blood pressure. So these two enzymes, that is the ACE and the ACE2, they play a critical role in maintaining blood pressure in the blood vessels, and their functioning is getting disrupted by the SARS coronavirus 2. This study has shown that the SARS coronavirus 2 is reducing the ACE levels and increasing the ACE2 levels. So this results in a low blood pressure situation, and this triggers the excessive production of bradykinin, which is responsible for dealing with a low blood pressure situation. So this bradykinin storm that has been triggered causes the blood vessels to expand, and in the process, the blood vessels get damaged, leading to swelling of the surrounding lung tissue. This swelling and inflammation leads to the accumulation of fluids in the lung tissue, and along with this, the bradykinin storm produces excess hyaluronic acid and turns it into a jello-like substance, and a combination of these two reduces the oxygen carrying capacity of the lung tissue and thereby reduces oxygen uptake. But however, these findings are yet to be peer reviewed and confirmed, and if it is accepted, it will help in the development of suitable drugs and intervention that can manage the bradykinin storm. Next, on page number 13, The Hindu carries a column that sheds more light on India's most covert secretive organization, that is the SFF, or the Special Frontier Force. See, this secretive covert organization of India is in the limelight because during the latest tensions along the line of actual control between India and China, India has admitted that an elite commando of the SFF has been killed in an accidental mine blast near the Penong Tso Lake region. So this acceptance by India sheds more light on the SFF, and it also points to a strategy that India is pursuing against China. See, the Special Frontier Force is a covert special force that is largely comprised of Tibetan refugees, and it functions under India's external intelligence agency, that is the Research and Analysis Wing. Its primary mandate is to conduct special operations or covert operations primarily behind enemy lines. When this special force was constituted back in the 1960s, its initial objective was to operate only across China's borders. But over the years, the SFF has seen action in various theaters of conflict, and it has emerged as a highly secretive covert organization that functions under RAW. See, the SFF was formally established in 1962 with the approval of the Nehru government during the India-China conflict of 1962. Initially, it was referred to as Establishment 22, and it was placed under the Intelligence Bureau, which at that point was handling India's internal and as well as external intelligence. But later, the task of external intelligence was taken away from the IB, and it was handed over to a new organization that was established in 1968, known as the Research and Analysis Wing. Since then, Establishment 22 was renamed as the Special Frontier Force, and it operates as a covert special force of RAW. But the story behind the establishment of the SFF in 1962 dates back to the 1950s, and it is connected to China's annexation of Tibet. See, after China annexed Tibet in 1950, a rebellion began against the People's Liberation Army, which was seen as an occupying force under the leadership of the Dalai Lama. Between 1956 and 59, the Tibetan rebellion started gaining strength, and during this period, the Tibetan refugees who were flowing into India and Nepal, they were recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States, which was then locked in an ideological war with China during the Cold War, and the CIA worked with India's IB to train these Tibetan refugees in order to offer resistance against the atrocities that the PLA was committing in Tibet. It is said that some of these Tibetan refugees were trained in guerrilla warfare by the CIA and the Intelligence Bureau, and it is also reported that they played a role in safely escorting the Dalai Lama and his followers to India and Nepal when they sought asylum in order to escape Chinese persecution in Tibet. During this period, a proposal was made by IB's legendary chief B.N. Mullik to turn these Tibetan guerrilla fighters into a formal covert force of India against China. But initially the proposal was shot down by the Nehru government as it was looking to diffuse tensions that were rising with China. But later in 1962, after China declared war against India and initiated the hostilities, the Nehru government granted approval to the IB to establish a covert special force known as Establishment 22, which would later be renamed as the Special Frontier Force. Later in 1968, when RAW was set up to handle India's external intelligence, the SFF was also transferred under the RAW, and since then it has taken part in a number of covert operations, not just against China but also across India's neighborhood. In the 1960s, when China was actively pursuing a nuclear weapons program, the United States was very much interested to monitor China's nuclear program along with India. It is said that commandos of Establishment 22 were used in these covert operations. Then later, the SFF would go on to play a key role in India's covert war against Pakistan that led to the liberation of Bangladesh in 1971. The writer of this column points out how SFF commandos were deployed in the Chittagong region, who were not only supporting the Bengali rebellion in East Pakistan, but later they were also locked in a conflict with the West Pakistani forces. The SFF also played a key role in the Kargil conflict as well, and more recently they have also been deployed during the latest border clashes with China. Traditionally, India never acknowledges the existence of SFF because it is meant to be a covert organization that usually operates along the border areas or beyond enemy lines. It is for this reason the role of the SFF in these conflicts is not acknowledged and recognized by the Indian government. But the latest report of the death of a SFF commando during the border clashes with China possibly points to a new strategy that India is employing against China. Former RAW officer Jaidev Ranade explains in this article that India might have deliberately acknowledged the death of the SFF commando as a part of its psychological war against China, because this points to the close connection between the Indian government and the Tibetan refugees, and it shows that India not only accepted them and gave a home for the Tibetan refugees and the Tibetan government in exile, but it also recruited them into a special covert force that is more than willing to fight on India's behalf, and this is bound to trigger China's anxieties with regard to Tibet. Mr. Jaidev Ranade points out that the Chinese were not even aware of the existence of SFF for nearly 3 to 4 decades after it had been established. So according to him, the acknowledgement of the death of a SFF commando might be a deliberate leak by the Indian side in order to send a signal to Tibetans inside Tibet and also to the Tibetan refugees in India and unite them behind a common cause, and also to send a message to China to trigger its insecurities over Tibet. Now let's take up another column from page number 13, in which Suhasini Haider explains the impact of American sanctions against few officials of the International Criminal Court. The writer calls these American sanctions against the ICC as a major setback to multilateralism and a rules-based world order. See, recently the American government has imposed a visa ban, and it has ordered the assets of 2 ICC officials to be frozen. Why? Because the International Criminal Court has been pursuing an investigation into allegations of war crimes committed by the American forces and its CIA in Afghanistan. See, the International Criminal Court is headquartered at The Hague in Netherlands, and it has been established through the Rome Statute, which was signed in 1998 and it was brought into force in 2002. Under the Rome Statute, the responsibility of the ICC is to investigate allegations of war crimes, genocide and crimes against humanity, and it is allowed to take action against such governments and against those officials who are involved in perpetuating these violations of human rights. But the United States has justified its decision to impose these sanctions against ICC officials for investigating these allegations against the United States because the United States has never ratified the Rome Statute. The United States has labeled this as an attempt to target the American forces, and it has called the ICC as a corrupt and broken institution. But this decision of the US to impose sanctions against the international body has been criticized by the United Nations, by the European Union, and as well as by 10 members of the UN Security Council, including close allies of the United States such as the United Kingdom and France. See, when the Rome Statute was signed in 1998, 139 countries were on board, and the United States was a part of the founding movement. But later, the United States decided never to ratify the Rome Statute because of a few reasons. And on the other hand, countries such as India, China and Russia have never signed the Rome Statute. There are a couple of reasons why India did not sign the Rome Statute, India's first concern was that the Rome Statute allows the UN Security Council, which is an elite club of just 15 countries, out of which the P5 countries enjoy the veto power, to refer cases to the ICC and even block these proposals. And it can even order ICC rulings to become binding on non-state parties as well. So according to India, this is not just a discriminatory provision that gives powers only to the members of the UNSC, but it is also a violation of international law. Then upon this, India was unhappy that the Rome Statute did not cover cross-border terrorism, it did not cover the usage of nuclear weapons and as well as weapons of mass destruction. Plus, India also had reason to believe that the UNSC being a geopolitical platform, the ICC shall be used as a geopolitical tool to target other countries and use their internal conflicts to push for allegations of war crimes and genocide. And since India also deals with numerous insurgencies, it was hesitant to sign and ratify the Rome Statute because of its fears over the misuse of the ICC as a geopolitical tool. But however, no country has ever imposed sanctions against a multilateral institution, and by imposing these sanctions against ICC officials, the United States has caused a major setback to multilateralism and a rules-based order. In fact, this is a continuation of the stand that the Trump administration has taken against multilateral institutions. Under Donald Trump, the United States has quit the UNESCO, the UN Human Rights Council, the Paris Agreement of the Climate Change Convention, and more importantly, the Iranian nuclear deal, or also known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Now, by imposing sanctions against ICC officials, the United States is causing a major setback to multilateralism and a rules-based order. And this is quite ironic because the US places the same allegations against China with regard to its aggression in the South China Sea and its violation of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. Which of the following statements are correct? The Dongria Kod tribe can be found in the state of Odisha. It has been listed as a particularly vulnerable tribal group or PVTG by the United Nations. They reside in the Niyamgiri Hills of Odisha. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is incorrect. See, the Dongria Kod tribe found in the Niyamgiri Hills of Odisha has been listed as a PVTG by the Government of India, that is by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, not by the UN. So the correct answer is option C, 1 and 3 only. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 6 that makes a reference to the Dongria Kod tribe. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? Department for Promotion of Industries and Internal Trade and the World Bank jointly publish the State Business Reform Action Plan or BRAP. The state BRAP brings out the state level ease of doing business to measure the overall business environment in the states. Maharashtra has topped the country in the latest ease of doing business rankings according to the state BRAP 2020. Amongst the given statements, the third statement is incorrect because it is not Maharashtra but Andhra Pradesh which has taken the first spot in the ease of doing business rankings that has been brought out by the State Business Reform Action Plan 2020. So the correct answer is option B, 1 and 2 only. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 6. Now let's take up the next question. Which organization is the designated first responder for oil spills in Indian waters? The correct answer is the Indian Coast Guard. Option B is the right answer. Now let's take up another related question. The Trilateral Maritime Security Cooperation Initiative of India that is focused on the Indian Ocean region includes which countries? Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius and Seychelles. The correct answer is option A, 1 and 2 only. See, this Trilateral Maritime Security Cooperation Initiative includes India, Sri Lanka and Maldives. Under this initiative, the national security advisors, they meet frequently and discuss the security related issues of the Indian Ocean region. They come up with strategies to tackle piracy, radicalism and terrorism. And through this initiative, India also provides assistance to Sri Lanka and Maldives with regard to maritime security. And India helps these countries to secure their exclusive economic zone by conducting joint patrols and surveillance and by transferring military equipment. As of now, Mauritius and Seychelles are invited as guest participants to this trilateral meet, but there is a proposal by India to include Mauritius and Seychelles as well in the future under this maritime security initiative that is focused upon the Indian Ocean region? These two questions were asked because we have an article on page number 8 that refers to the fire incident involving an oil tanker off the coast of Sri Lanka. Now let's take up the next question. The recent peace talks between US and Taliban that led to the signing of a peace deal were held at Doha, that is the capital of Qatar. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 9, the Taliban is all set to return to Doha for peace talks with the US. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following statements are incorrect? A circadian rhythm is a natural internal process that regulates the sleep-wake cycle and repeats roughly every 24 hours. They have been observed only in humans and apes. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is incorrect, so option B is the right answer because the question is asking you to identify the incorrect statement. See, circadian rhythm is observed in plants, in a number of animals including human beings, and as well as in microorganisms such as fungi, cyanobacteria, etc. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 11 that makes a reference to the circadian rhythm that basically refers to our internal body clock. Now let's take up a question from the 2016 prelims paper. What is Greenhouse Gas Protocol? The correct answer is option A. It is an international accounting tool for government and business leaders to understand, quantify and manage greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, what is the 13th Amendment in the context of India-Sri Lanka relations? Discuss in detail and elaborate the contentious issues. The second question, write a detailed note on the Elite Special Frontier Force and its role in India's external covert operations. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.